Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 35, My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. It is Point Blank. My name's Kurt. Joining me is Justin.
Hey.
Hey.
Long time no see.
Yeah. We're in Nigeria, Justin. How's it going?
I wish I was there right now, but you know what? I'm not going to look down a Albuquerque fall. It's actually quite lovely this time of year. The green chilies roasting. The leaves are just beginning to change down in the Rio Grande Valley. Sun is bright as hell, and if you stayed inside and looked out the window, you'd think it was summer, but that heat is cut and it's dried out, and I'm feeling pretty good today. We have a birthday party for a friend later on, and they're serving us green chili cheeseburgers in a park. So I'm pretty psyched about that, and a couple beers.
Sounds good. Yeah, the one thing about fall weather is it does make me want to do more cooking, and I just happened to get the Nordic baking book.
I saw some results from that on Instagram or Facebook,
Yes.
Whatever. They look delicious.
Yes, I made some Kringles, some sweet sugar Kringles, and I have some rye bread that has been doing its thing for about 5 days now. And it's finally going into the oven today. So I'll be looking at some fresh rye bread for dinner tonight.
Dude, I wish we lived closer.
That would be nice.
I think we should, I have a little Greek heritage. I think we should come together and start a Norwegian Greek restaurant. I think that would really, the ultimate fusion.
Norwegian Greek fusion.
Yeah,
huh?
There's a lot of a
Yes.
fuckload of lemon and oregano on your lefse.
Well, there you go. But meanwhile, we're in Nigeria, which has its own wonderful food culture, but that's not what we're exploring today. We're exploring the book, My Sister, the Serial Killer.
That is accurate. We gave you a bit of a preview last episode, and we had some good things to say. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper this episode, spend some quality time with Braithwaite's first book, which is pretty impressive for a debut, would you say?
I would. There's a lot to love here. It's an enjoyable read, a quick read, but an enjoyable one, and one I'm glad we picked to feature on the show.
Totally. Before we dive into the summary, I just wanted to give a shout out. In the past couple months, I made acquaintance with the editors of Flash Fiction Offensive. I had entertained the idea of sharing with them my story that I read for Noir at the Bar, and we talked about it for a while, and they gave me some good editorial advice. It ultimately didn't fit their needs. I mean, it was an oral story, and I was struggling to want to translate it much from its original source. But I really enjoyed engaging with Jesse, Jim, and Mick, really attentive and generous editors with a lot of good stuff to say. And I wish them, and that project, which has been around for a long time, started by Joe Clifford and others, best of luck. So if you haven't checked out Flash Fiction Offensive, or you haven't submitted to them, check it out. They have some real plot-driven, fast-paced crime stories, and some of them are really good. So anyway, are you ready for this, Kurt? You ready for me to dive in?
Yeah, let's dive in head first, I guess, into this
Cool.
book.
Okay, so Oyinkan Braithwaite, this is her first novel. It's called My Sister, the Serial Killer, and it's a short crime novel. We're talking about 200 pages, published in 2018, so it's a relatively fresh book with a lot of readership and a lot of hype, which is convenient for us to actually be in a time and place where we can talk about a book while it's still popular. So I guess we're going to milk that for what it's worth. Anyway, this is a story that's set in Lagos, Nigeria, largest megalopolis on the African continent. And we mentioned it before. I wouldn't say that this novel puts Lagos front and center. This is more about two sisters. And those sisters' names are Korede and Oyula. And they come from this middle upper class upbringing. One of them works as a nurse and is the elder sister. And the other one, Oyula, sort of She doesn't really, she's relied on her looks to get through life and doesn't seem to have any particular ambition outside of seducing young men and possibly killing them. So that's the basic premise. It's in the title, so I'm not giving anything away there. Now, how this all works. The two sisters have this sort of jealous rivalry type of thing. Corriday is less good looking and she's sort of self-aware of that, and she has a bit of jealousy toward Ayula for having the looks and always attracting the men. And this tension, compels and drives forward the plot, especially when we get to the hospital and meet Corriday's closest doctor friend. His name is Dr. Tate Atumi, and Corriday works with him, and you can tell she's pretty obvious about her lust for him or her pining for him, and she fantasizes about a chance to be with this man who's kind and giving to patients. He's sort of like the ideal doctor, the kind of doctor who really is doing the job because of their love to help people. So you get the impression that this guy's a good dude, and Corriday, desires him. But then, because of this competition with her sister Ayula, who has just recently lost another boyfriend through an act of violence, which she calls self-defense, but anybody with a couple marbles in their brains would call murder, she shows up to the hospital, and you can tell right away when Tade sees her, he is seduced. He is dumbstruck by her beauty. And Corriday obviously hates this. Corriday feels like her chances with the doctor is ruined, and that tension between the three of them drives us all the way through to the end of the story. There's one other thing worth noting here in terms of characters. Is there's a plot wheel involving Corriday and a coma patient named Muhtar. As a nurse, she caretakes for a living, and she has found a special purpose for Muhtar. She goes into his room when she's taking breaks and sits and just talks to him. She tells him her stories. She complains about her sister. She talks about all the dark secrets about her dad and about her sister, and the fact that she thinks her sister might be a serial killer. And of course, this is safely preserved in Muhtar, who is in a coma and has been for years and will quite possibly never wake up. Of course, this is a bit of a trope, because if you're going to have a coma patient in the story, they have to do something. They have to change at some point. Either they die or they wake up. And what if he were to wake up and remember everything she had told him? You can take a guess about which path Braithwaite chooses to go in the story, but I'll leave it at that. In terms of the setup, the tone, the quality of the writing, this is a darkly comic novel, and it's a fast-paced novel with very short chapters. Some are several pages long, some are only a sentence or so long. So it moves quick, and it in the present tense it stays chronological, but sometimes when it dips into backstory, you get it chronologically. You get bits and pieces from throughout Corriday's past life in a way that helps us as we need it, but over time you really get a sense of what's going on to help fuel who these two characters, these two sisters, have become in the present. A lot of the backstory has to do with their father, who passed away under questionable circumstances, and who was an abusive, dominant man, and seems to be some of the catalyst for how Ayula turned out to be who she was, and possibly Corriday as well. What else? The dramatic question is this: will Corriday continue to protect her sister who fuels her jealousy and makes her feel bad about herself on a regular basis? Or will she reveal to the world in some way that her sister is a serial murderer? Which path will Corriday take? And you know what? This is a good book. This is a fun book. This is a book where the tension is ripe all the way through. I liked it. I wanted to love it, and I thought with a little more Lagos and a little more character development, I would love it. However, I think Braithwaite does a good job handling the tension with the sisters and the escalating tension over whether Ayula will be found out. I really like when the cops come into the house they're going to borrow Corriday's car and test it for blood. Like, some real tense scenes where you're really rooting for the characters to make it out. But at the end, I guess I didn't care enough about either character as much as I'd like to in order to feel the ending. And I get it. It's Noir 101, and I said this before in the last episode, but, you're going to have unlikable characters. I feel like there are two ways to have unlikable characters. You got to have one that is just likable enough to root for them despite all their flaws, or they have to be so despicable that you fall in love with hating them. And I feel like these characters were a little more middle of the road, where I wasn't getting enough of either to really lock in my opinion. So I think that, Braithwaite's a beginning novelist. This is her first novel, so she did a pretty remarkable job given that. And overall, the ending is solid. Is more solid than the one in Blood Sugar. I won't spoil it. I'm going to stop spoiling endings per se, but she does a good job of not being totally predictable. And I would give this a 4 stars. I would maybe more like a 3.85, but I'm going to stick with 4 stars. Kurt, have you shifted at all from your view of it from last episode?
I have not. I'm sticking with a solid 4. And for me, that 4 means that it's a book that I highly recommend it. I think it's good for somebody to read. I think, as you said, this is it's a quick read. It's a fun read. I enjoy the style of the dark comedy that comes through in the writing. I think for a first novel, this is very solid. There are a couple of things that keep it from being a 5-star for me. But as I've said in the past, a 5-star is one that's really going to have to hit every single of my personal requirements for a 5-star book. So don't let my 4-star rating hold you back at all from reading this. I think it's solid. I agree with you that the place could have come through a lot more. And perhaps that's only a downside because of the type of journey we're trying to take around the world here with this noir. If you look at it in a different light, the fact that this could really take place anywhere is a benefit to the story. It could really exist in just about any of the major cities of the world, I would say, and you could still pull off a similar story. And that universalism of it is maybe why it's been had so much international appeal.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it works in that way, but for what we're trying to do and grab the place of Lagos, it does leave a little bit to be desired for us in our purposes.
Totally. I mean, I really think I understand that point of view, and I think that you're probably absolutely right that could compel certain people to find it more palatable or whatever. But I mean, I teach that there's universal in the particular, like what makes a story universal is how human it is or how it affects us. So taking all the details that really bring a story to life and sort of cleaning them up or like making them go away so that the place could be anywhere. I feel like in most cases it does a disservice to a story, but probably not the best time to rant because we haven't really talked, but it drives me crazy that there's not enough, like, I guess I've been holding back. It drives me crazy. We might cut this, but it drives me crazy that there's not as much Lagos in here or Lagos as there should be. Like, why the hell would you take out the awesomest city in the world from your story so that people in Ohio can fucking read it and not be scared by a big city? Like,
well, I mean, I get that point, but I mean, is it really necessary to the story that's being told here? I don't know.
Good point.
That it is. I mean, that's not so many of the pieces of crime fiction that we've looked at, the city is a character. And in this story, the city doesn't need to be a character.
Think about Queenpin. You're right. And Queenpin had that exact same issue. Yeah. It was about the dynamics of 3 characters and the 3 places they went, the casino and the hotel. And, it's like, that's what this is. It's the house. It's the car. It's the hospital. That's it.
Yes.
So yeah, you're right.
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's a right and a wrong to it. It's just, this is the way this story works.
Yeah.
And if, it could have been done in a different way and still worked with a lot of Legos in it. But, I do, going to your point about the characters, I do think that there's some subtle things that could have been done differently about the characters that would have made me feel a little bit more compelled to either love or hate different characters. I think there is a little bit of simplisticness to the motivations and the way that the basically all the characters are portrayed. But I don't think that really holds back from the story. No. I think it's just I feel like we're kind of nitpicking on something that is close to being excellent.
Sure.
It's one of those things where when you enjoy a film or a show or a book and you just want it to be just that little bit better. to make it like, I think that's kind of where we're at with
Yeah,
this book.
and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to be that. I think it's my bias for wanting to see more Legos that's getting in the way of being able to clearly reflect on this novel and its characters. And there are some, there aren't many characters in the story. There I can count them on one hand, almost literally. The Korode, Ayula, Dr. Otumi, the late father who appears in the backstories, and then the coma patient Mutar. The rest is sort of tangential, right?
Yeah.
Which of these characters, is there anybody that was like a clear favorite for you? Somebody that really moved you? Or no? It's not that kind of book.
Well,
exactly.
No. I mean, the one character that I think is probably the most interesting, and this does give away something that happens later in the book, but I think Mutar is probably kind of the more interesting character to me in some regards, because his reactions are not necessarily what you would expect them to be.
No, totally. I was very thrown by like his waking up and his relationship with his surroundings and the people around him. I would have definitely caught me off guard, and that's a good thing that he didn't fit the kind of trope I was expecting him to fit when he woke up.
I mean, I guess we have to talk about Korode because she is the main
Sure.
character, really. I there's elements of her that I like the idea of the loyalty. I like the idea of the sisterhood relationship that's going on there. A criticism would be that is that really enough to justify Korode's actions?
Yeah, you're right. Go ahead.
And to sort of foreshadow our next episode, I'm going to have a very similar question about the novel Out when we go to Japan. And that is a core element of what the question is behind this book is, would you go to these steps to help a sibling? Who's almost the worst criminal in this case? The person who's doing the murdering, or the one who's essentially facilitating the continuation of these murders?
And I think that's a question that this novel unambiguously asks. I think that's part of it. We have the obvious potential killer, and then we have, the person who helps with the cleanup. And at some point, we can debate this or not, but our sympathies might shift and evolve over the course of the novel but we're in the head of Korode. We're with Korode as she sort of negotiates her feelings on her sister and her father and the doctor, and how she seems to be at the center of all these. She's like the hub of all these spokes, and she's trying to hold it down. And we really don't know much about her as a person and her day-to-day life, except what we see. So much of what she does in the story is go to work, react to Dr. Otumi, and react to her sister. And we don't really know much about her as a character outside of this, except in the deep backstories with her when her father was still alive. So I feel like we never really get to know her super well. I think we ended up in Queenpin getting to know the main character in that story a little bit better. I feel like I felt like I knew. We got to see her rise and see her become the woman she was in the story with her sort of questionable ethics, whereas Korode's questionable ethics aren't really clearly articulated, the reasons why she chose to or became this person who you're not sure if she's going to side with light or side with dark. I wrote down that I liked her the best, but I think that ultimately this is a story about unlikable characters. There's not one character in this story that's like, oh, the good guy or the comic relief or the one who has the moral center. It's all about a whole lot of darkness with little glimpses of light, but the light doesn't stand the test of time in any of these characters. From Mutar, who reveals himself to come alive, and it reveals his personality, about the 75% mark. The father was an abuser. Dr. Atume is weak-willed and easily seduced by physical beauty, and doesn't seem to have a backbone. And Ayula, who might be a murderer, even if it's somewhat justified at times, sometimes it is not at all. And Korode is a little bit flimsy, and her devotion to her sister is, at one point, refreshing and righteous, and at other points, she's just as despicable. So it's a challenging. I think it's a challenging book in terms of characters. Who are you?
Yes.
Who's driving you? Who's keeping you motivated? And maybe it's the crime itself or the scenario, which is the prime mover for the reader.
I mean, I do think that I think the intent here of this novel is that these characters are not particularly deep characters. They're people acting on rather shallow emotion, but ending up in these rather difficult predicaments, in part because of that. And a lot of what this novel is about is how people react to very superficial things. The idea of beauty being, of course, the star among them. Iola doesn't get away with, if she wasn't this beautiful person who people couldn't believe would do these sorts of things, she probably wouldn't get away with it. But they allow her to get away with it because, oh, it couldn't be me. I didn't do that. Well, no, of course you couldn't, because you're one of the beautiful people. There's a real shallowness from all different perspectives there because of that sort of nature of the relationship. And that seems like it comes throughout the whole book, really. And even Corriday, who does have a little bit more depth, is still somewhat shallow in her analysis, because a lot of this just comes through as, well, we had this family tragedy, and from now on I am always going to protect my sister, and no matter what, or will she, I guess, is the question. But that's still a fairly shallow reaction.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, you're right. I think that's something. I as you were talking, I wrote, it feels like it's more a study in like character types than it is in unique individuals dealing with complex issues. It's like the calculus of trauma and death and coping is reduced here more to arithmetic. It's like, oh, dad was mean, protect sister, we'll do terrible things, but I feel like it's a little bit streamlined, which makes it an easier read and more of a book club book. But I feel like we've read more complex books, or that deals with things like, crime fiction is about murder. It's about how we deal with death and how we deal with being human and relationships between people. And the best books for me are the ones that really recognize the complexity and don't try to clean it up and make it so straightforward and streamlined, because then it starts to feel more like we're dealing with, two-dimensional characters who are being put into a story just to, like a mouse in a maze, to see them do certain things, which they do, and then it ends. I don't think this book is entirely two-dimensional, but it does feel a little bit streamlined, like too clean cut for its own good.
One of the things in some of the interviews with Braithwaite that I found online and whatnot is that, a lot of the authors that we've discussed on this show are students of the genre, let's say. And Braithwaite is a poet first. She is more of a literary fiction type writer. And she didn't set out to write genre fiction. She didn't even really think of this as crime fiction for a long time until her getting into more of her final editing process. It obviously is crime fiction, but it does, again, as a first-time author, now maybe now she's going to be stereotyped as a genre writer. That is kind of the downfall of this sort of thing, right? But will she in future novels bring more of that genre knowledge to the table? I don't know, but that could be an element here. Well, okay.
No. I was just going to say, like, you're right that if she's coming from she's got the poetry background and the lit fic background. Maybe she's writing a literary fiction that sort of crosses over in a genre, but this doesn't feel like that either to me. And it doesn't, like, I didn't go, this feels like a literary fiction book. It felt more like a study in a situation. Like, she thought of the situation. What if, somebody's sister was a murderer, and then tried to fill in the blanks from there, like a thought piece. Because none of these characters are so deeply developed that it was a character-led story. And, I think it was definitely a plot-driven thing. But this doesn't reek of literary fiction to me either. So it definitely feels more like it's driven by like a typical crime fiction scenario. The setup and the cover-ups and the tension. Like she was reading a whole lot of suspense. She's not reading, fucking Philip Roth or whatever when she was writing this. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just saying it's unique. I guess maybe we're wrapping our heads around it, trying to figure out, because it feels somewhat overly simplistic, but also not, but also, but different. Like Queenpin, but not like Queenpin. It reminds me once in a while of David Goodis a little bit, but without the noirish. That book dripped noir ambiance, and this didn't have that. I don't know. It almost feels like it's a screenplay, like it's very skeletal.
I would agree with that analysis. I mean, I wonder if a little bit of that is some of the poetry background coming through, and I think you see that maybe in the playing of with the structure for sure.
Yes, I think that's pretty literary. The way that you set up the chapters, and I love that shit. I do. I eat that stuff up.
I enjoyed that, and I do know that she wrote this. She said that as she wrote this, each chapter was its own word file, so that it was like supposed to be its own distinct story per chapter.
Yes. I've done that before to mix results, but
Yeah.
I understand that idea. It's like you're trying to compartmentalize it and give it its own space and room to breathe and develop each piece, which is cool. That's a real cool way of trying to construct a cohesive overall project like this.
And I do want to say, and I think this is worth mentioning, it really comes through in the interviews that Oyinkan this novel was really not, this was supposed to be like, I just need to write something, get it out there. You know, she was kind of looking for a small press, you know, I'm going to get something complete so I can move on to my next thing. Right. And when you know that, and she's pretty honest about that in the interviews, when you know that that's what this is, then I think you can see that come through in the fiction, knowing that.
Sure.
You know, that it wasn't, because it does read that way. Like it's not supposed to be super deep. It's supposed to be just, you know, let's get this done and move on. And the popularity, is certainly surprising, I guess, for her.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine struggling to get your first piece done and just to get it out there, and you do a good job, but then everybody in the world wants a piece of you? Like, that's just overwhelming. I can only imagine.
Oh, it's got to be. It's got to be.
So I've done enough with characters. There's nobody I'm really want to like sit with for a long time in this and talk about. I think we covered the sense of how this isn't really about the special unique characters that we just can't, stop talking about. It's more about plot. It's more about the way the story's set up to create suspense and the style. But is there anything in particular in regards to like, how did this plot work for you? Did you feel the tension? Did you feel like, was this a page turner for you?
Yeah, I would say it was a page turner. I'm not sure that was entirely driven by the plot, but perhaps more by the structure, the short chapters and whatnot. And it just read quickly. It did make me want to get to the next thing. I do think that the plot, as if you just did a bare bones outline of the plot, it's not really a unique plot per se, but I do think that she does make some twists in it, which keep it interesting.
Yeah.
And feel fresh. But I think we've looked at books like this before where this is, it's not really a surprising plot. And honestly, it's not really surprising characters. It's just a well executed type of story with some slight twists on a standard that makes it feel, like something you want to read. What makes this feel fresh is the point of view of that it's covering two women as your main characters, and the fact that it's Nigerian, really.
Sure.
I mean, that's what makes it, and a little bit of the structural element.
Yeah, but I mean that there's danger in saying that's why why it's good or whatever. You're saying that. Well, what if it was just two dudes and it was set in Florida? Would it still be a compelling narrative? Would it be worth reading? And part of me would say, well, no. And the other part would say, well, it depends. But it makes me nervous to like go, well, it's because, of who wrote it or from where it was written, which would make me almost be like, well, is it actually good at all? And I would say It is. And I think and you mentioned it, you said it's, the point of view. I would say it's the presentation. It's taking, all crime fiction is recycling old shit. Like everything's been done. It's very rare to do something entirely new and untouchable, something that hasn't been recycled. This is all recycled shit to some extent, but the way that it's presented, the way that it plays with the chapter form and the structure, the point of view of the main character. And, I think the ending is, not entirely expected. There's enough of a wrinkle to each to conventional plot lines and characters that it stands alone to an extent, but that's where there's room for improvement. And as much as I gave it a 4-star review, I did say I started with a 3.5, and that's coming clear in how much I feel like I want to critique it, give it a constructive critique, and that the place matters. Showing Lagos would help, just like showing the two guys in Florida. I'd want to fucking see Florida, especially because the characters are not super well deeply developed. They're if you don't have a really well developed character and you don't have a well developed, clearly identified place, that makes it feel a little bit like it's been sketched in pencil and not drawn in with pen. And I still yearn for a little bit more detail in one of those areas. The skeletal structure is standing out to me more and more as I think about like what the actual meat of the story is.
That's certainly fair. I mean, I want to kind of look at some of the things that I like about the story, and because we're really Braithwaite has said in interviews that her inspiration here is the Black Widow story, the Black Widow spider, and of course, like that's a trope, Black Widow, right? But what makes that feel a little different here, I think, is that you definitely have the tensions of society tensions and the sisterhood tensions, right? Where you have one sibling who's like the responsible one, the older sister. She has the like more legit job. She's the one who's more thinking about her actions to a certain degree, but she doesn't have the one thing that her, she believes that her sister uses for her success, and that's her looks. And so we have that play going on. And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to, right? And,
sure.
And it's maybe, whether that's beauty is one look at it, but it might be, intelligence or the fact that some people just seem to be successful for no particular reason that you can put your finger on, and you wonder how the hell did that person make it, and you're still struggling. I mean, that's a very common emotion for people,
sure.
right? A certain level of jealousy, right? And I do think that what Braithwaite does here well is I do think she kind of moves this into a little bit more modern narrative. And one of the ways that she does that is the inclusion of social media in the story.
Yes, Instagram.
That was a conscious choice of hers, which I saw in an interview, is that she felt that a lot of fiction kind of modern fiction ignores that element.
Sure.
I think, yeah, that's definitely true.
Totally.
And her inclusion of that in this story is, I think, really one of the, I don't want to say a highlight, but it was well done. And it felt believable as to the one sister, the Corday is like, well, you can't post on Instagram yet. You can't do these things. And there's also almost a generational argument going on there, right?
Yeah.
As the older, and she's not just representing the older sister, but she's representing that, I guess, generation that is not entirely immersed in social media.
Sure.
The younger sister is, and she's like, well, no, it's fine. It's been I've waited a month. That's long enough. People online have forgotten.
And the thing you're talking about, it's about like the death of one of her boyfriends and how their family will see what she writes on Instagram, and it might raise some red flags. And Ayula's like so blissfully ignorant or unaware or unconcerned about, which is a very serial killer, very sociopathic sort of tendency, like just closed off to the emotional impact that your actions would have. Like, she's like, whatever, no big deal. And Corday's like, you're going to fucking incriminate yourself. And through that, if you're not careful, you gotta be careful. That clash is interesting. That like you said, the divide.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, Iola's essentially right about that. She's like, well, most people have moved on in a month. Social media is not, people have stopped tagging this. They're not paying attention anymore.
Yeah.
And that happens in the course of the novel. Like, she brings that up, that people aren't resharing what happened to this guy and his website. I'm talking about Femi here, the poet. There's a website with his poetry up for a while, but eventually that disappears, and like his memory is just sort of gone from not his family's memory, but broader society's memory, because it's moved on. We don't have that long of a memory anymore. I guess when it comes to that kind of thing.
You can get away with anything. Your successes and your failures will evaporate in moments. What else about this book? I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it is pretty straightforward. I do think one thing that was interesting that again came through some of the YouTube stuff that I was looking at about Braithwaite's inspiration, and she went over through 3 books that inspire her, and I think you see that come through. I'll just list them off here. She says Jane Eyre, and that's the first person narrative.
Yeah.
Great expectations for a heartbreaker type character. A children's book called Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters, and it's about 2 sisters. And in that book, they're both beautiful, but the story is that one is like, I don't want to say ugly, but like, I guess not pure of heart, I guess you could say. So the story there is about really, it's, it's not just on the outside what's important, it's about what's on the inside as well.
Sure.
So I can certainly see those things being an inspiration for this novel.
I have a question. I guess one of the characters you brought up briefly that I have more questions about because you sort of exceeded my expectations or bewildered me a little bit. And that's Muhtar when he comes out of the coma, and he has like this thing where he's like an asshole to his wife, and he's like his family's like plotting against him, but it's not. It's like a side story, and it's not told from their perspective. So we're just like every time Corday goes in the room, he like says something. He's like. There's just weird like family conflict with him and his family, and he reveals to Corday that he remembered everything she told him, and so she has like this fantasy of like, well, what do I do? Do I kill him? Like she has to like now she has somebody who knows her secrets. I thought that was just an interesting triangle, her and him and his family, and I still scratch my head over it a little bit. Like, how did that all go down? How did you feel about that? Do you feel like that worked for the story and added another layer of spice?
At first glance, it worked for me. But now that I'm thinking back on it, I'm not entirely sure why it worked for me. I'm sure the conflict with the family, I mean, when he came out of the coma, like he knew that they were basically going to pull the plug on him and, and whatnot. And I don't know how I would feel about that.
Yeah.
But it did seem like there was some scheming going on by his brother-in-law and his wife or something.
Yeah. There was a marriage, a presumed marriage, and they wanted his blessing. Like there was some shenanigans behind the scenes. And it was interesting to have all that happen. And like the 75% mark in the book, like, all of a sudden we're thinking about this other like plot intrigue, which doesn't have much bearing in any way on the main conflict. So I was wondering why that was in there, and if it added something that I missed, or if it was just a little bit of a sidebar to keep us entertained or something.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but my guess is that we needed Corday to have some sort of sounding board of like how she was going to make her, I guess, ultimate decision towards the end of the book.
Yeah.
And she can't really talk about, there's not really another character in the book that she can talk about those things with.
Well,
so
yeah.
I guess he provides that.
Well, he definitely does. And I understand why she talks to him. And I loved, although it's a little cliche, I love the element of, him waking up and all of a sudden she has that added level of danger. But I think maybe part of it, and it just occurred to me, was that she was watching a triangle that went sour. They were a family who were not protecting each other, who were not standing up for each other, who were not loyal, and maybe that helped to influence her ultimate decision in this book. She had to choose whether or not to ally with her sister, and especially with the big scene at the end that involves the sisters and Dr. Atume. So maybe it was sort of like a way that she could process and make a decision for herself which kind of person she wants to be. I'm just feeling like it's got to serve some kind of function in the story, or it's just tangential excess. And I think it does serve a function, and I think that might be it.
Yeah, that sounds right. I do feel like maybe there should have been. I don't know. Maybe that could have gone a little differently, but
yeah,
in my first read through, I didn't really have a problem with it. It's now, maybe if I reread it, I would feel differently. I don't know.
All I know is that when I was done with the book, I remember going, what the hell was with that Muhtar stuff? And then I went back to the book to get to those sections to try to understand it. And I still was a little bit confused. So I'm thinking if it's not that, then it's got to, I hope it's that. I hope it's that it feeds her necessary information to clarify her thoughts and make a decision. We mentioned the craft. We mentioned that this is a terse writing. There is a little bit of poetry and there's some clever structuring in this book. And that's one of my favorite parts. In terms of historical context, I mean, there's not much. This is a new writer, and this is a good debut from a writer with a bright future. But this is the beginning of her story. I think it could open up the door for more Nigerian writers to gain popularity. We mentioned that with Nigerian noir and how plentiful and rich that scene is, and how I never heard of any of it until I read her work and started to do a little bit of research. So I'm really excited about that, how she's single-handedly, Braithwaite's exposed me to other writers that I should have been aware of, but wasn't.
Yeah, I think you summed that up nicely. I think that's exactly what we're looking at here. I think we're going to see some more stuff that we, maybe we don't pick apart as much from Braithwaite in the future, but really this popularity and exposing Nigerian noir to a broader audience is the real plus here. And I'm very thankful to her for that and for the popularity that this book has gotten. And I'm happy to have read it. Even if we had a few things to nitpick about it, I enjoyed the book. It's a quick read. It's a good read. And I think most people are going to enjoy it.
Yeah, and I agree. It's a good book. And part of the nitpicking, like we're comparing it to some of the best. I'm comparing it to Queenpin, which I gave 5 stars, which I thought was one of the best noirs of the 21st century. So, I mean, that's a hard act to follow, and that's just this is a debut novel. So I don't think we were overly harsh. I think we were fair in our critique, and there's some real good stuff here, and there's some stuff to improve. And you know what? She's probably going to blow us away with her next novel. So there's also that.
Well-thumbed classics. All right, it's once again time for Well-Thumbed Classics, although I feel like maybe we need to change the title of this as to something like Unknown Classics or something along those lines, because a lot of this stuff isn't straightforward, well-known titles. Now, last time you may recall, I looked at 2 novels by Bernice Carey, and I was not impressed with her work and the collection from Starkhouse Mystery Classics. And this was part of my exploration of female writers, mystery writers, noir writers of the 50s. Now, I'm happy to report that the author that I looked at this time is exactly what I was hoping to find when I went down this road. And that is 2 novels by Helen Nielsen, Borrow the Night and The Fifth Caller. This is also from Starkhouse Mystery Classics. Nielsen was born in 1918. She was a journalist. She was involved in art, aeronautical drafting. She worked at the Chicago Art Institute. She was a draftsman during World War II and designed airplanes. She wrote 18 novels and over 50 short stories for places like Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, Manhunt Magazine. She worked on television dramas, the early Perry Mason, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. She spent most of her life in California, and then she passed away in Arizona in 2002. So Nielsen this isn't quite Dorothy Hughes in A Lonely Place, but I would say it's much closer. And you're looking for a lesser known author from this time period who's really worth rediscovering. Nielsen is on that list, I think. Borrow the Night is somewhat reminiscent of Night Has a Thousand Eyes. So it reminds me of that just in a really light sense as far as the narrative goes, because at the beginning of this, we have a Judge Ralph Addison. He receives a threatening letter that he's going to die, and he's going to die in the same time as a guy that he sent to death row. Now, early in this story, we find out that the cop who arrested the guy who's on death row is also getting these same letters, and that this killer is saying that they've sent the wrong man to death row, and because of their actions, this judge and this cop are going to get killed. So the judge and the cop go on this last-minute investigation to figure out, first of all, who this Mr. Justice is who's writing these letters, and whether or not they made a mistake in the original case. you hear this as a cliche in mystery fiction that, oh, I didn't know until the last page. Well, this one really follows through on that. My opinion on who did this crime must have changed at least a half a dozen times while I was reading this. I think Nielsen kept the tension up throughout the story, and there's really a nice twist, multiple twists towards the end, really. And I really did find myself guessing at who did it until the last couple of pages. I thought the tension was good. Why it reminded me of A Night Has a Thousand Eyes is because there's a clock involved, and this like in this timeline of this impending death or doom or whatever. But unlike Night Has a Thousand Eyes, this one kept the pace going the whole time. It was exciting and interesting as to what was going on. Borrow the Night is the name of that one. And you'll also find in Nielsen's writing some good social commentary, which I think is, I think that's kind of critical to good crime fiction. And this one, Borrow the Night, has some critiques of the death penalty and the justice system, which I found were interesting. The second book in this two book collection is The Fifth Caller. Here we have a death of a Dr. Lillian Whitehall, and there's a clock theme here as well, because she was killed with a clock, so we know exactly what time she died. Now, the woman who has been arrested, she's arrested right at the beginning of this story, is a woman, Anna, who's a Hungarian nurse, and she was arrested for killing her boss, basically, and she has amnesia. She says she didn't do it. She doesn't think she did it, and we have sort of a recreation of the last day of Lillian Whitehall's life to try to figure out who actually killed it. Now, this one has some commentary. Remember, this is the 50s, so there's a post-World War II thing going on here. A lot of people think Anna is involved because not only did she survive the Holocaust, but she had to escape from communist Hungary as well. So they the cop kind of says, well, oh, she's one of these immigrants. She's a liar. She had to learn to lie to make it this far in life. So we can't believe what she's trying to tell us. And of course, as you might expect, that's kind of unraveled through the course of this book. But this is the kind of book where it's probably going to get disproved, but it's a matter of who actually did do the murder. And I think of the two, Borrow the Night is the stronger of the two books in this collection. But, I think Helen Nielsen is an author who deserves a little bit more spotlight from this time period. So check that out.
Awesome, man. You said Dorothy Hughes and my ears peaked up. All right. Well, I guess it's time for, as always, 5-round burst.
5-round burst.
What do we do with 5-round burst?
In 5-round burst, we do 5 reviews in, roughly 5 minutes. But Justin, you've got a couple for us today?
Sure. I guess I'll knock them out. I'll start with my longer one, and it's relative to what we've been talking about. This is a book we've mentioned, Lagos Noir, by Chris Abani. He's the editor. This was published by Akashic Books in 2018, so it's relatively new. It came out the same year as Braithwaite's novel, and this is one of the best Akashic collections that I've read. The first 3 stories absolutely slay, and I really loved the last 2 as well. And there were several, throughout it was consistent and consistently vivid, fun, creative, and exciting collection of crime stories. The thick middle is a wild jeep ride across lagoons, over spaghetti bridges, past neon lights and garbage piles, and a night light that never ends. This is the kind of Lagos I want to see. Now, the first story is called What They Did Last Night by Jude Dibia, and it's about a crew of robbers and a good cop who hunts them down. He refuses to compromise his integrity by accepting bribes, but how long can any cop resist corruption in a city like Lagos? The second story is Heaven's Gate by Chika Onigwe, and it tells the story of a down-and-out guy who goes to the Reverend, who's a local crime boss, for a loan on a motorbike. The man wants to make a living, and this is one of the few ways to do it. The only catch is that he has to make regular payments on the Reverend's investment, and if you have the money, you always owe it to somebody. If not the Reverend, then the cops, or the bosses, or someone else. So obviously, this story doesn't go well for him over long as he tries to work back and pay back the interest on his loan. Again, another story featuring police corruption front and center. The third story that I really loved in this is called Shologo, And it's written by Nnedi Okorafor, and she is well known for her African sci-fi, the Binti series in particular. So she's already well established. She's a professor here in the States. And this story is a riot. It opens with a guy falling out of the sky into the Chicago suburbs. Where did he come from? And how did he get there? And let me tell you, he's alive. He falls from the sky alive onto a sidewalk. This is Show Logo, and we read about him and get to know his story. He's the toughest motherfucker in Nigeria, and it's hilarious, and I highly recommend checking it out just for that story alone. The penultimate story is a story called Uncle Sam by Leigh Adenle, who we've mentioned previously. And it plays on the whole Nigerian prince internet scam and actually gives us that in a possible scenario. And this story, and I'm going long here because there's so many good stories in this collection. But the last story is called Killer Ape, and it's actually written by Chris Abani, the editor. And this is a murder mystery set in a fancy colonial house where a chimpanzee is accused of murder, which is sort of reminiscent of like the classic detective stories. But it's clever and it's fun, and it's a nice, lighthearted way to end what I think is a real terrific, A-level collection. So highly recommended.
I read that one too, and I have to say, hands down, the best Akashic collection I've looked at so far. Yeah. I mean, that's a solid collection of stories right there.
I had already felt like Nigerian noir was something that I was shocked to realize was so good and so rich. And then I read this collection, and these can be hit or miss. And almost every writer was just like right on, and I'm like, wow, like for that to happen, I mean, you can only imagine how many writers aren't even being discussed that are really knocking it out of the park as well. So yeah, a really cool fecund literary world we have waiting for us in Lagos. My second piece this time, and this is going to go less than a minute, is Baltimore Blues by Laura Lippman. This is her first book in the series starring her main character, Tess Moynihan. And I was excited about this book, and I was excited about Laura Lippman. She's referenced often with Megan Abbott as this new wave, these queens of noir, these sort of carrying the torch of classic noir writing. I was super psyched, but this is not Queen Pin, and it's not. I'm sorry, but it's not even close. This is a relatively straight up PI story starring Tess, who used to be a journalist and is not anymore a journalist, and she tries to solve the mystery of this murdered asshole lawyer. And I think this book is probably better than I feel it is, but the character building in the first 50 pages just simply, it didn't lure me in. I don't care about rowing and rowing culture, and the two main characters bond over their interest in rowing in the river. I don't care about fucking lawyers. I don't care about courtrooms. I don't care, like, so much of it in the first 50 pages I so didn't care about that it is totally not the book for me. Maybe it lacks the grit. Maybe I really wanted to see Baltimore and its grittiness, and I felt like I wasn't seeing the best of that. I've seen that better in other books, including PI series like the one in Boston. What's his name? Robert Parker. I bet there are better Lippman books, and I'm sure she's put out some real stone cold classics, but this one wasn't it for me. So readers, if you have any suggestions for like classic, great Laura Lippman, send them my way, because I really want to figure her out and like her work. And this Baltimore Blues did not do it for me.
Well, that's too bad. But hey, we've definitely covered some duds on this show before.
It happens, yep.
It happens, yep. All right, well, I've got 3 this time, and they're all, 2 of them are Nigerian noir, and one is relatively close. So let's first take a look at When Trouble Sleeps. This is an Amaka thriller. This is the second book by, how do you say it? Adenle?
I think it's like Leigh Adenle. I'm not, I'm probably butchering it too, but it looks like Adenle. I don't know. I did not type how to pronounce in YouTube to figure it out.
Well, either way, he's an excellent author. I'm really enjoying his work, and I need to figure out how to say his name. But this came out this year, 2019, from Cassava Republic Press, which I think is a great name for a press, by the way. Mm-hmm. And this is the second book in the series. I read it out of order, and that was my mistake. I just jumped on it because it sounded good. And we are looking at the first book, Easy Motion Tourist, in the Goodreads reading group. So if you want to get involved in reading these, I really recommend this second book. It was a strong hit for me. As I said in our earlier discussion, this really captures the chaotic nature of Lagos and Nigeria. It speaks to the political intrigue, the corruption, the crime, but also a lot of what, that there's a lot of good things going on in Nigeria as well. This one starts out with this crazy scenario where this plane crashes, killing a candidate for office, but the plane crashes into his own house. And from there, chaos just ensues. I mean, a new candidate is brought up by the party. And of course, that involves a lot of scandal as well. There's a secret sex club involved. And that's where this character of Amaka comes into play. And I haven't read the first book, so I can't say what that speaks to, but she is essentially she's the daughter of a diplomat, and she's kind of taken her privilege, her education, and she's become an advocate for the sex workers in Lagos.
Cool.
And yeah, and and it's done in a very sensitive isn't quite the right word, but it's done in a very good way. And I'll let you explore that in the book itself. But this book, it really shows off the seedy underbelly of Lagos. But like I said, it also shows that like there's these people like Amaka who and others who are really working for a better Nigeria as well. This book is what really, I believe I read this one just after Lagos Noir, but before I read My Sister the Serial Killer. And this is the one that really brought me into this Lagos as a city, as a character, and I just enjoyed it pretty thoroughly. That was a strong hit for me.
Awesome.
Yeah, the second one I've got is Wife of the Gods. This is a Darko Dawson mystery. This is the first one. Came out in 2010 from Random House. And now this is not Nigerian, but it takes place in Ghana, which is in the same, the general area of Africa. So there are some similarities. Darko is a investigator for like their version of the National Crimes Unit or whatever. And he is sent to a small village to investigate a death of a promising medical student. This young woman was killed, and Darko is sent there because he's fluent in the local language, because it happens that his mother is from the same village. Now, his mother disappeared when Darko was a younger child. So she disappeared when she went to visit home 25 years ago. So we have these dual mysteries going on in the book. And now this one's maybe a little bit more to closer to a cozy mystery, perhaps. That's not exactly right, but it has more of that feel to it than a hard-boiled noir type story. But what is interesting here is Darko, he's symbolic of the more modern Africa, the urban, educated African who is, he believes in science, he believes in forensics and all of this sort of thing. And he goes to this smaller community where people don't necessarily have those same beliefs. And there's a real clash. And it's called Wife of the Gods because one of the themes that it explores is this traditional, guess you want to say, practice where the wife of the gods is where a young girl is essentially given to a old priest to be his wife. And that is something that the priests, prescribe because the family has had bad luck or something. So they say, well, here, give me your daughter and I'll marry her. And then that, your problems will go away. That's the basic thing going on there. And you can see how that would be problematic. So it explores that. The investigation is interesting. There's some twists and turns to the story. Darko Dawson is a very interesting detective character. He is not like a damaged detective like we often find, but he's also eccentric enough that he, of course, like all detectives in this kind of genre, doesn't quite fit the system and does his own thing. But it was an enjoyable read, and I would recommend Wife of the Gods.
Cool.
Lastly, and this isn't really crime fiction, but it was close, and it was something I wanted to read about. This is called Oil on Water, and this is from W.W. Norton, came out in 2011, and it's by Helen Nielsen. The catalyst for the story is this takes place in the Nigerian Delta, and it deals with the oil production that's going on there, the exploitation of the locals being forced off their land. They form militant groups. They often go in and will kidnap people who work for the oil companies. And I, just as an aside, I've actually know somebody who basically had this happen to them. So this stuff does happen. And a lot of times it's because the right people weren't paid, or this didn't happen, or whatever. It's very complicated. And I wanted to explore that, and this novel does a very good job of that. It follows two journalists, Rufus and Zach, as they search for this kidnapped white woman through the Nigerian Delta. It definitely has Hearts of Darkness or Apocalypse Now type elements to it. And as they go, further away from the city and through the river system and islands, things get darker and the story unfolds. Rufus is the young reporter looking to make a name for himself. Zach is sort of the veteran ace reporter who's past his prime and falling on hard times. Their journey takes them through war-torn areas, interactions with militants, interactions with the army, who, and of course raises the types of questions of like, well, who's really at fault here? And of course, the fact is that, everybody essentially, because of the system that's in place, is having to make very difficult decisions. It's interesting because it explores this part of Nigeria and the Delta and looks at this issue of oil exploitation and environmental issues and the effects on the local people. There are some problems with the plot. I would recommend this if you're really interested in that idea. I wouldn't necessarily just recommend this as a novel.
Huh. Sounds like a pretty good lineup, especially those first two. I feel like we got some good reading in this time around.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that Oil on the Water is bad. It's just, it isn't. It's just a different type of novel than maybe we would normally look at on this show.
Fair enough. Okay, well, we made it through Nigeria. Next stop is Japan. We're going to be reading Natsuo Kurino's Out. This was a well-regarded novel that came out a while back. After that, we're going to read Gage Layton's Blood of the Wicked. This is set in Brazil, and we're going to get to know Brazilian noir from Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, etc. Then we move on to Paco Taibo, who's the novelist extraordinaire of Mexico City, crime novelist and prominent leftist. Looking forward to his work. What I've read of his is terrific. So those are the next 6 episodes, and after that, we come home to the United States and decide what the hell we're going to do next.
Well, Justin, I think after touring the world, our next stop is going to have to be to either go into the stars or the future and look at some science fiction noir. And we have kicked around the idea of looking at Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
That would be super fun. Yeah, I like that. And good old dystopic LA sounds like the right remedy to getting back into the United States and what we have here. So.
Sounds good. And if you want to get in touch with the show, you can always do so on Facebook at Point Blank Hardboiled Noir and Detective Fiction. You can send us an email at pointblanknoir@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter at pointblanknoir. And as always, we really appreciate it if you go onto iTunes and leave us a good review. That does help the show. So until next time, keep your bags packed. We've got a long journey from Africa to Japan. It's going to be a long boat ride. So sit back, get in your hammock, and relax.
I'm going to get on a motherfucking camel.
Okay, then.
I'll see you in a month.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye, you mother ducker, or you mighty duckers.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.